don't know, herbal medicine really offers a lot. I really like helping people in these situations. It's just really, I'm not a person who believes in altruism, but I do like helping folks. Yeah. So I'll keep doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. First up is the Herbs with Rosalee Student Spotlight. Each week we take a moment to celebrate one of our amazing students and their inspiring contributions to our herbal community. This week we're thrilled to shine the spotlight on Amanda Steele from Washington. Amanda joined our Herbal Energetics course in fall of 2024 and considers herself a budding herbalist. Since joining us, Amanda has become an active and engaged member of our course community. In addition, she's on the certificate path and has consistently impressed us with her thoughtful, detailed module reviews. Her reflections often include fascinating deep dives into her plant allies, showing a beautiful blend of curiosity, dedication, and growing wisdom. It's really been such a joy to witness Amanda's herbal journey unfold. Her enthusiasm is just contagious, and her willingness to explore and share has made our learning space all the richer. To honor her contributions, Mountain Rose Herbs is sending Amanda a $50 gift certificate to stock up on their incredible selection of sustainably sourced herbal supplies. Mountain Rose Herbs is my go-to for high-quality organic spices, herbal remedies, and even hard-to-find botanicals. They ship all over the U.S. and have a massive selection of products to fuel your herbal adventures. So thank you to Mountain Rose Herbs for supporting our amazing students. And if you'd like to explore Mountain Rose Herbs offerings and support this show, you can find the special link in the show notes. Hey friends, it's Rosalee. If you've been nourished by this podcast, if it's helped you feel more connected to the plants or more grounded in your own herbal path, then I'd love to invite you to join the Herbs with Rosalee podcast circle. This special membership helps make the podcast possible. It supports everything we do behind the scenes, and it gives you a chance to go even deeper with the content that you love. Inside the circle, you'll get exclusive herbal resources, live classes each season with some of my favorite herbal teachers, and a private space to connect with fellow plant lovers. It's where the heart of our herbal community continues to grow. To learn more and join us, visit herbalpodcastcircle.com. Your support means the world, and it helps this podcast continue to bloom. Having Seven Song on the podcast has been on my bucket list for a while now, so this feels especially fun to get out into the world. We also went off script for this episode, and instead of the usual focus on one single herb, we meandered through a variety of subjects, including what not to do when providing herbal support after disaster. We talked about the importance of an herbal consultation and some interesting herbs to have around for first aid. We also did chat about two herbs that you don't often hear about. For those of you who don't already know him, Seven Song has long been entranced by the non-human natural world, especially herpetology and botany. He also wants to be helpful in the human community, and herbal medicine feels like a good marriage of these two interests. He is the director and main teacher of the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine, which he started in 1992. He is the director of holistic medicine and a practicing clinical herbalist at the Ithaca Free Clinic. That's an integrative free clinic that includes both conventional and less conventional modalities. He's one of the clinic's founders, which opened its door in 2006. Welcome to the show, Seven Song.
Thank you very much, Tori.
All right, I'll take it. That's the best response ever.
We can start all over if you like.
Oh no, we're not cutting this. You just called me Tori. I'll take it. Earlier, before we started recording Seven Song, you also did a WWTAS, which took me a second, but it was what would Tori Amos say, and that's like my new mantra in life. So already this is going grandly. So thank you. Well, I'm really excited to have you here. It's been fun getting this set up with you, and I've been wanting to have you on the show for a really long time, and I'm excited what we're going to dive into today. But as always, we're going to start with the very first question, which is, how did you become an herbalist, Seven Song?
I think a little bit through serendipity. It's a common question. I mean, I think the real answer is, who knows why we choose the paths we choose. I mean, sometimes it's obvious, like you have a family member that does something, and then you follow in their footsteps. I clearly have nobody. I mean, my mom was a nurse, so I have medical in my life. So I think the answer is coming from a level of trying to help people. So social justice is the more common term for it. But when I was a teenager in the 70s, we had other words for trying to make the world a better place for people. And so I've always had that kind of conscientiousness to want to be helpful in the ways that I can. And then I also really like nature. Plants are just a big one part of nature for me. So I think kind of, again, serendipitously over time, those two combined. I was living in Santa Cruz, California in 1981. I already had some interest in both of these subjects. And I went to a school called the Platonic Academy of Herbal Studies. It lasted a few years, not well known. And that started my process. Also in that school, Christopher Hobbs was teaching botany. And since then, I really, really like classifying plants. I like knowing what they are, way more than just the medicinal plants. So I think really how I became an herbalist was kind of combining my ideas of wanting to be helpful in the ways that I can, and also wanting to bring nature into it. So nature was in my life.
Yeah, and that's I love too the aspect of the social justice that you talked about, because we had talked previously in another conversation about being at protests, and you're wanting to have something to do, and it kind of made sense. Like, oh, I could be at the protest and give and have something to do in terms of like a first aid station, which I definitely, when I think of you, Seven Song, I think of herbal first aid in many different shapes and forms.
Thank you, Rosalee.
Yeah. I'm curious who some of you, I've never heard of the Platonic. What was that? The Platonic? I never heard
the
that.
Platonic Academy of Herbal Studies. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you ask some of the Santa Cruz herbalists, they'll know it, like Roy Upton or Christopher Hobbs, who lived in the area and taught there. I don't know if Roy taught there. And there was kind of, so, I mean, other herbalists lived in that region, but Paul Lee was the director of the school, less an herbalist, I think, and more of like a bringing together different sorts of people kind of person. And so, yeah, I just went there for a few months. But botany was the thing that stuck the strongest out of that school. And also just learning plant medicine, it was in its early days for people like myself who never had it in their lives.
I didn't realize that Christopher Hobbs was such an early influence on you, so that is interesting. And who were some of your other early teachers?
Well, probably the biggest influence. So 10 years after that, I went to the California School of Herbal Studies. Actually, let me take it back. So, no, let me take it forward. I forget whichever direction I'm going. So soon after going to that school, the Botanic Academy, I went to the California School of Herbal Studies, and I lived on the land there where the school still is. And so I don't know if I had a specific, Christopher Hobbs also taught there. But there were lots of teachers who came regularly. And I think that the influence was more multiple different people and just hearing multiple angles of herbal medicine. And Rosemary Gladstar ran the school at that point. She was an influence. But again, a lot of her influence was bringing people together so I can start going to, so I can start meeting people with different opinions and experiences with herbal medicine. 10 years after that, 1994, I went and studied with Michael Moore in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I also taught botany. That was my first experience teaching for a group of people, big group of people. And Michael Moore was a very big influence. Mm. The reason he was a big influence, some of this is going to sound snarky, but it's true. And the snarkiness is he uses salty language, to put it in one way. And I always liked cursing and swearing. Obviously, I'm not doing it all the time, but I like it. It gives punch and emphasis to dialogue. And most of the other teachers just avoided those words, and Michael Moore did not. And so for me, he was a permission giver. And also, I'm a very science-minded person, and a lot of the herbalists I studied with came from very strong spiritual traditions and just had very strong spirituality, but that's not how I see the world. And so I don't really know what Michael Moore's feelings on those are, but he was very science-minded. And again, for me, somebody, younger and trying to learn herbal medicine, again, it was more permission giving that science was a good is a good view for herbal medicine. So those two things were really important to me. Also, he's a plant guy. He liked plants. So we'd go on field trips, and just when he would go and talk about a plant, he had very obvious enthusiasm to just meet new plants.
I did not get to meet him, but just reading through, his books, and I did the online studies with him. But I love how, I like how you said he's a permission giver, because he's just so real. He'd be like, after you've eaten a chimichanga and two, soda pops and your digestion is off. Like, he was just very real in that way. It's like, this is, medicine for real situations, like a chimichanga situation.
Yeah, for some, he did talk about those a lot. I think, because as a real human being himself, he just didn't advocate for purity, I guess, something like that. And so, yeah. Also, he was snarky. So that was fun too.
Okay, I'm gathering that. I like that. Yeah. All right. So 7-song influenced by Michael Moore's snarkiness. We'll put that down. At what point did you start getting involved in disaster relief situations, or I'm just going to group it all together, like going to rainbow gatherings, going to protests? Like, how did that evolve?
Well, these are really different things. So I started going to protests as a protester rather than street medic, probably by 1978, mostly against nuclear power, which now I have other thoughts about due to greenhouse warming. But so I went to a lot of protests. So even as an older teenager, I was doing that, but not yet doing first aid. Rainbow gatherings, I went because I was a flaming hippie. And so I liked going to the woods. I liked being around large groups of people, kind of practice learning outdoor skills. But as we'll find out with a lot of things, after a few years of going to the rainbow gathering, I wanted to do something when I was there. I always can do something, wash dishes, help cook, or things like that. So I started using my herbal skills, which I had already started studying. And I started working in the first aid area. I worked at the first aid area in the rainbow gathering for over 40 years. I've just recently stopped going. But it's really an amazing experience because it's a wilderness gathering. So there's no electricity, hand pumps for water, lots to describe about it that I shall not. But also, we're the only first aid station. Like, if somebody gets badly hurt, the hospital is probably 2 hours away. And if the person's really badly hurt, you're going to have to stretcher them to get them to a car, to get them to a hospital. So as opposed to doing first aid, I don't know, like at an event where there's an ambulance that can be there in 4 or 5 minutes, that was not our experience. And so I got a lot of hands-on. I worked with doctors on a pretty regular basis, and just worked with a really large assortment of people from various socioeconomic strata. So that's important because a lot of the people we saw came from places that they didn't have, disenfranchised folks. People didn't have a lot of resources. So when their health took a downturn from something like food poisoning, it would take a bigger downturn because they didn't have like the nutritional fortification that other people might. Let's see. So, and then disaster relief is just kind of was obvious after doing both those kinds of things. So I've been to Katrina. After Katrina, I went mostly to Mississippi to help out, and then later to New Orleans. Standing Rock more recently, a couple of years ago, to help out. I don't know, herbal medicine really offers a lot. I really like helping people in these situations. It's just really, I'm not a person who believes in altruism, but I do like helping folks. And yeah, so I'll keep doing it. During COVID was the one time I didn't. As I've gotten older, I just started getting a little more concerned about, am I going to get sick? Though I am around sick. I work in a clinic, so I'm around sick people pretty regularly. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm curious. Let's go to the rainbow gathering for a moment. What are some common things that you would deal with? Like, could you name like the top three?
I
Could you
could name the
categorize
top.
things for me?
I can name the
Top
top
one.
one,
Yeah.
which it kind of annoys me, and that's foot injuries because of people being barefoot.
Mm,
So like you always know who's often barefoot and who's not regularly barefoot, because if you're
mm,
barefoot regularly, you kind of get used to walking without shoes. And there would be people who just hardly ever barefoot, and so they constantly cutting open their feet if they don't get treated. So another thing we saw a lot was staph infections, mostly around their feet and ankles.
mm,
So that was really common, the most common by far. Other things that we saw pretty regularly with digestive problems. This is actually true at a lot of events, because you might have a strict diet, but when you go to a place like that, unless you bring all your own food, you're going to have to eat what's around you. And then sometimes the food is contaminated with bacteria like E. coli, or we don't really ever test what the bacteria is. I mean, we're not going to do that where we are.
mhm.
So we get food poisoning, lots of different kinds of diarrhea. Those are probably the more common ones: staph infections, foot injuries, diarrhea, sprains and strains, lots of wounds. So people cutting wood for a campfire and, missing a log and hitting their leg and, having some kind of wound. I mean, sometimes, of course, we have to send that out, but often I'm not a stitcher. That's the one thing. Suturing is something I haven't learned. So somebody else would have to do that. But certainly I can clean it out and make a decision on the seriousness of it. Can we strip it up? Does it need to be sutured? Does this person need to go to a medical facility?
Hmm. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I would have guessed a couple of those. Yeah, the food situation makes me like, that's one thing I personally, maybe it's just like the double Virgo in me, but I'm not really keen on going to large gatherings, mainly because of that one issue. I feel like that's a common thing experienced at those gatherings, unfortunately.
It's true, though. If you call
You
yourself
just
a double Virgo, there would be a whole camp of people that you can be around.
there we go.
The
We'll have
double
our own
Virgos
food.
for touring Amos. I'm sure there's a camp somewhere there.
Awesome. I will find that camp. Um, so I know, we've had a lot of natural disasters. I mean, recently you mentioned,
Sorry about that.
going back, to Katrina, and oftentimes people want to help during these disasters. I mean, just in the past 6 months or so, we've had North Carolina, Hurricane Helene, all the states affected by that actually, and then LA and the wildfires. I'm wondering how herbalists can help, and I'm guessing you might have some tips on how they can not tips on maybe what not to do as well.
Yeah, I think tips what not to do is almost better. So I think most of the people I know who study herbal medicine really want to help out. I mean, often people who learn this skill, clearly it's not going to be for money, right? I mean, it's not a wealth in producing category of healthcare worker. So a lot of people study it and then they make medicines. And then when something happens, like Helene in North Carolina, Tennessee, they want to help out. So there are ways to help out, and you can. So the first thing that happens after a disaster is not medicine, it's just safety, right? Helping people get to safety, helping people. And also that one of the main things is just structures are destroyed and structures have to be evacuated, structures have to be cleaned out. So there's a lot of work there. So as far as just sending stuff, that happens later. So initially, after something like that happens, people are not organized yet, but everybody's sending stuff, lots and lots and lots of stuff. This happens pretty much everywhere: LA, or North Carolina, Mississippi. And so the thing to do is to resist the impulse to send things to people until you make clear contacts with individuals who are either they need it themselves, no problem, then send it to them. So somebody who's in a place that's been hurt by a hurricane or any kind of disaster, and then find out what they need. In other words, start asking. And if you just start sending large amounts to people, they're in a stricken state, right? They're in a grief state, they're in a concerned state, they're in an angsty state because a lot has happened around them. And if you send them a bunch of medicines, they might not have the organization set up to distribute them. So just give it some time and start to make calls. I do it on social media. So basically, it's a little easier for me because I have a large social media presence. But I'll just start saying, like after the Los Angeles fires, I'm here to help. How can I help? Many people will write to me. And then I will call some of those. I'll call the ones that seem like there's going to be a connection there. And then I wait for them to organize, or I can help organize them, saying this is one way to set up networks for distribution, right? So again, right, there's two things you might be doing. One of them, this is a family that's been harmed, and you could just send them whatever they want. That's very straightforward. The other is you're sending things to be distributed. And so then there's a whole bunch of things. First, everybody sends salves. And while salves are helpful, they're often not what everybody needs. So you want to find out, the goal is to not reduce your apothecary. The goal is to help people getting the medicines they want, often in larger quantities. So once you connect with people, probably they're going to be herbalists, right? Because if they're non-herbalists, you're saying, well, I can give you echinacea and Oregon grapefruit and yarrow and chaparral. If they don't know what to do with those, it's not going to be very helpful for them. And then they're just going to feel guilty if you send it to them and they don't know what to do with it. It's just more storage on their side. Mm-hmm. So get your contact information, find herbalists in the area. There's herbalists all over the place. Some places more than others, like North Carolina and Los Angeles, have lots of herbalists. And then find out what they need. There's two ways to do that. You can find out specifics. They might say, oh, we need, like after Los Angeles, we might need a lot of wild cherry honey for coughing. Or they might say, we need things for coughing. And then you can, make formulas. It's expensive to send stuff. So just be aware that if you're sending a bunch of things in glass bottles, first there's a whole bunch of shipping that comes into play. And then what I like to do is send large bottles. If they don't have small bottles, and smaller bottles, but that are empty, maybe. It depends on what's going on. Then I make the labels for them so that they can, pour into smaller bottles, put a label on, and then I write very explicit directions to help people. So it's not, because they're going to get lots of stuff. If you've been to one of these places, if you've been to an organizational storage area for these things, lots of stuff comes in, and organization is key to getting it out. So you can help by being very organized in what you give. And then, so basically just don't send stuff right away, even though it feels good, and it is good. Find out what's really needed. So I think that's a good beginning for it. Then, so one thing, if you're a clinical herbalist like I am, you can go and then sit with people. So after Helene, which was North Carolina, Tennessee, I went 2 months after it happened. I have a lot of friends there. And basically, a lot of the clinical herbalists there were burnt out because they've been doing this for weeks now. And so I would go to these pop-up clinics where they distribute medicine, and then I would see individual people in the back and just discuss whatever health issues, and then we make specific medicines for them. So that's something else you can do. If you go down, you get a better eyes on. Just make sure you know where you're going to stay, so you're not putting people out of their way being there. How's that?
That's great. That's an interesting insight into. I'm just gaining this appreciation because as you were talking about, people sending stuff to these things, I think about Standing Rock, which was, went on for some time, and just what that must have been like to receive. Because I know so many people who sent stuff in that direction, and just what that takes, and then the kind of skill that's needed is not just herbal skills, but like running a pop-up clinic is a skill that I just had not really appreciated before this conversation.
So at Standing Rock, so a lot of these places, I want to be really clear. There are people there who were there for months at Standing Rock, and they deserve a lot more attention than me. I was there for 9 days.
Mm.
During my time, I want to say, so, the building, the structure, because, it's all temporary structures, for the herbalist was not particularly big. And so all the extra stuff had to be stored outside. There was one tent, like a medium-sized tent, that only had salves. There was one tent that only had elderberry products, something else that people really love to send.
Wow.
So again, it's a good thought, but it's better to check in, because my guess, I can ask, a lot of stuff got wasted because I was leaving as the snows were coming down. And then it's like, there's no place to really store anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're just being stored in tents, at least in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really important thing to consider. Ryan Drum would often say that in his classes. Like, he would talk about, like, we need to be really, really real about the amount of herbal waste that happens because of things, not necessarily specifically about this, but all the reasons that herbal waste might be happening. And I don't know, it did make me think of that a lot. Well, so you've done a lot of help with disaster relief and then things like the Rainbow Gathering. Another thing you do a lot is the free clinic. And as you said, you're a clinical practitioner. And so the question, I would say, like, the questions I get asked the most are like, what herb do I take for hypertension? Or, what herb should I take for Lyme disease? Or, I have Hashimoto's, what herb do I take? And I would love to hear your take on the importance of an herbal consultation and why we need those.
Oof. There's a lot that goes into it. So one of the things is so one of my goals as an herbalist is to help people understand their diagnosis. So what is Hashimoto's and why is it a problem? Why are your symptoms occurring from your Hashimoto's? Why does diabetes affect the eyes and kidneys? Why does hypertension potentially lead to strokes? So I think using plain language, one thing to start the process about seeing anybody, doesn't have to be an herbalist here, is helping people understand why their condition creates their symptoms. And that way, because the goal is really to give agency, right? The goal is not to just give formulas. The goal is to help people feel comfortable understanding what's going on. I mean, so not everybody wants to know what's going on in their body and why you're doing certain things. But I think there's a lot of subtle ways to help people understand more about the process that their body is going through, so that they can make individual choices and saying, what they can do and can't do, and also just helping with harm reduction. So if somebody's having a lot of problems and gluten is a problem, maybe stopping gluten, but that can be very difficult to do. If you have a family, that can be more difficult to do if that's a part of everybody's meal. So then harm reduction comes into it. So I'm not really answering your question directly. So I think what I'm trying to say is there's multiple things that outside people can give insights to people having health conditions, whether they're herbalists or not. I mean, the herbal thing comes later. I want to say this about first aid. So doing first aid, like, I call it herbal first aid, but there's no herbal first aid. There's only first aid. And then herbal sits on top of that. I mean, if somebody's bleeding, your goal is to stop the bleeding, right? If somebody has diarrhea, your goal is to stop the diarrhea, maybe with herbs. So I just want to say that, often the herbs are secondary to helping the person get to someplace a little more stable to then give herbs. And sometimes they're primary. Again, with diarrhea, you might just give a bunch of blackberry root to see if you can astringe. So number one is, I think people should see outside help if they don't really understand what Hashimoto's is and how it will affect them short-term and long-term. Once you have an understanding of that, then seeing a clinician, I think that often, how to put this, it's hard to treat ourselves. It's really simple to put.
Mm-hmm.
When we're ill is like the hardest time to make decisions on treating ourselves. Sometimes that's true for people we're very close to as well. I have to say, sometimes if I'm treating somebody that, I'm very attached to, I'm so worried about it. And so I just get a bit frozen. I think that can be true for some people as well. So, but especially for ourselves, it's just hard to make decisions. And so seeing somebody outside doesn't really have to be a specialized clinical herbalist. They could just be, I'm not specialized in any form. I think just seeing somebody and getting some insights from somebody who's calm-headed, right? So they're a little distant from it. And then helping people go through choices. So if somebody comes to me, there's really no herbs, for instance, for Hashimoto's. There's no like herb that's going to invigorate the thyroid to release the correct amounts of T3 and T4 into the body, bound and unbound, that's going to help. But there are herbs that help the body adjust that over time potentially help with things like hypothyroid or Graves' hyperthyroid. So one of the things I think seeing an herbalist does is we put in the practicality, and we take the idea that herbs are kind of magic, because in our society we have a very polarized view of herbs. Like they're antiquated, why do we still use them? Which is a reasonable question. And then they're magic healing potions that will help cure cancer and thyroid problems. And herbs are chemicals found in plants that are very interesting and often helpful. So I think just like practicalizing the situation, and then like if you've worked with a lot of people, then you have ideas. So you can ask if they're hypertensive, what is your goal? Is your goal to actually try to get their blood pressure down, to reduce plaquing, to help with anxiety, to help with sleep? So I think one of the things, even with high blood pressure, hypertensive, I think, what is your goal? And then what is the reality? If you have really high blood pressure, you have blood pressure that's 180 over 110, you're probably going to need medications, right? And those medications will be life-saving. So another thing is just, we live in an age of some amazing pharmaceuticals and procedures. And I think we have to remember that that's true. So we have to separate that from our terrible medical system. And just remember, though, that, antibiotics really do save, people say whatever amount, so many lives. I'm so glad to have opportunities to give them to people sometimes. So I think there's also just helping people realize like this, let me get you I work in a integrative clinic. So there's a doctor across the hall from me. It's free. They can make an appointment with the doctor, and then the doctor can write a prescription. And once they start getting their numbers lower, then there's lots we can do with herbs, or we can give them herbs while they're taking the medication, to help with prevent other problems that may occur. Not so much from the medication maybe, but from whatever the condition was. That is a very long-winded answer.
That's great. Something that's popping in my head is how have you ever been surprised in a consultation in some way, shape, or form? For example, go ahead. You already have something?
No, I have this is going to sound, what's the word for it? I don't even know the word. Sometimes I'm surprised when people are not on any pharmaceuticals. So when they're like 78 years old, they're in pretty good health, and they're not. So I'm not anti-pharmaceutical, but I'm so used to seeing people on pharmaceuticals, and I'm not against pharmaceuticals. And sometimes I am surprised at somebody because they're helpful and they're suggested so regularly. Though if the person's so that's only some of the time. If the person's very medically adverse, and they have a lot of health issues and they're not on pharmaceuticals, I don't have that feeling at all. That I think I want them to be on things that will help with their blood pressure or whatever we're working with.
That's interesting. I don't mean this like to brag, but I'm not on pharmaceuticals. And when I go to the doctor's office and like the nurse does the intake every single time, like, you're not on any medications.
Yeah,
no, I'm not. Like, and it like they ask it like in 5 different ways, kind of thing. So that's fascinating.
It's just like the same when you say, have you ever been hospitalized? Now people like, I don't know. And then like 20 minutes later say, oh, I had a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
And so I understand that there's other kinds of hospitalizations. So I think that's why we ask often multiple times. For me also, I don't know if they self-medicate, right? So whether they're on pharmaceuticals or cannabis or alcohol, or whatever they're taking, all those things are things I want to take into account. Fortunately, since cannabis has been decriminalized and made legal, people are less wary about mentioning that to me. People surprise me all the time. All kinds of things surprise me by people. So I'm not, but that's the one that came to mind.
That's fascinating. One thing for me with the consultation is that, well, there's this idea within herbal medicine sometimes that we can treat our own problems, and that if we just have read a book or taken one course, that now, we can fully treat things. And what has come up a lot for me in consultations is just that reminder that we don't know what we don't know. There's that body of knowledge. And so, someone might come with like a main complaint of one thing, but once you go through the consultation, it seems like very clear that there's other things going on that maybe is just not even in their like understanding of, how they might move forward with their health.
Yes. Yeah, I think the advantage of when people see me, especially in person, I think they've already like given over the reins a little bit, right? I think they've tried for themselves. Telehealth, even sometimes still, like sometimes when I'm talking to people and they're not seeing me as a patient, they'll talk about treatments. I was talking with the other day, somebody came to my house and they saw all the tinctures I had. There's a lot of tinctures in my house. And they said, can you treat worms with that? And I said, well, it depends if the person really has worms. And then they said, well, everybody has worms. And that's not true. Right. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it was just somebody coming over who was a friend of a friend, and I just didn't have a conversation. But in the clinic, I would probably say, no, actually, worms up here in the north in people's bodies are actually relatively uncommon. In the south, they're more common because of humidity, I don't know, whatever the environment is. Mm-hmm. So I guess sometimes I will counter what people are saying if I think it's unhealthy, and I think it's not excessively patronizing. And sometimes it doesn't really seem important to us. So if they say, for instance, that they're a double Virgo and that somehow affects their outcome, I think I don't really need to say anything about how astrology may affect herbal medicine. Unless they said, well, I need to drink like a quart of bloodroot tea every day because this is what Nicholas Culpeper said. And then I would have to say, well, maybe not.
Yeah, good call. Good call. Have you ever thought about how many consultations you've done in your life?
Yeah, I think about it sometimes. Actually, the other day I did a little bit of math and then I let it go.
Oh, really? Because I want to know. So I was like,
I don't know. Well, so I only work 4 hours a week. And during the 4 hours, I could see 4 to 6 people. I do that about 42 weeks a year. I've been at the clinic for 19 years, and then I was seeing people before that. Mm-hmm. So whatever, and then people just call me up. Though one of the great things about working in a free clinic is when they call me up, I'm like, I'll see you at the free clinic, telehealth, or in. So it's really advantageous because often I don't really I really like working with people, but when I'm set up to work with people, not when I'm watching Resident Alien.
So that was a lot of math to do in my head, Seven Song. You didn't come up with a number? Obviously.
No, math is not my skill.
Okay. So neither of us are math skilled people. We could probably say many thousands, though.
I've seen it probably 3,000 or 4,000 people, I guess, something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So I went to a little party last night, and probably I talked to 2 or 3 people about their health, which is what I like. It's an easy icebreaker for me. It's better than talking politics, that's for sure. So, yeah. But around here, here we talk about ice because we talk about both kinds of ice because ice is here, that organization, but also we've had a lot of ice, so it's been very treacherous walking these days.
I had a party last night as well at our house, and we talked about mud. We're just like in a slightly different season than you right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, mud is the topic of conversation.
Yeah, I talked to somebody about mud for the first time, but that's probably about 60 days away.
All right. Yeah. It's rural living. Well, I wanted to talk about a couple herbs, and this is just totally self-serving on my part. I would love to hear any thoughts you have to share on chaparral from a botanical perspective, from your own experience, from a story maybe of seeing chaparral, do its wonderful thing.
I like chaparral a lot. So we're talking about Laurea tridentata. I like the family, the Zygophyllaceae, which means uneven leaves because, the leaves like small leaflet, other leaflet. So Zygophyllaceae, different leaves and it's a plant, when I studied with Michael Moore, I was the botany teacher as well. So I gather plants to bring to class to botanize with the students. Chaparral, actually, I was in Albuquerque. I had to drive like 90 miles for chaparral, 60 miles maybe. So I mostly use chaparral externally. I'm concerned about its use internally. I haven't really gotten any good sources to help me because it's a pretty good disinfectant herb, and it probably has some uses. People often use it internally for some cancers, but I would be concerned it has pretty strong action, and I don't really know what it would do to a tumor. So I don't do that, at least internally. Externally, it's just one of the best disinfectants. It's one of the few herbs that will occasionally help kill toenail fungus. Doesn't always work in a really hot chaparral bath. And toenail fungus the fungus itself is problematic, and being under a nail bed just makes it really hard to get to. It makes it hard for the body's immune system to get to. Also, it could be helpful for staph infections, depending on the severity of the staph and how quickly it's spreading in the body. But really pretty much any wound, I think that chaparral washes, chaparral soaks, chaparral liniments are just one of the best disinfecting herbs, and they seem very safe used externally. I really like the plant because it's prolific. And so there's always this question of when you wildcraft and gather plants, how much can you gather safely? There are places in the United States where you can drive for 25 miles and like the main plant is chaparral. So I'm not talking about the chaparral zone in that part of California around Santa Barbara. I'm talking about chaparral, the plant. And so it's readily gatherable, which is really nice. I like the smell after it rains and you're in a chaparral area. And it's allelopathic. And so if you've ever gone to where there's lots of chaparral, one thing that you'll notice is you can walk between the plants very easily. That'd be very different. If you go to the woods right outside of my house, you're bushwhacking the whole time. The reason for that is chaparral leaves put chemicals in the ground that inhibit other plants from growing near them, including their own progeny. So that means all the plants are like a checkerboard and spread out, which just makes it an interesting environment. I mean, there's cacti and bursages that grow in between the plants, but there's also a lot of space. It just makes it for an interesting environment. That probably helps them with their water resourcing. And then this has happened twice to me, where I've gone one time with my sister, one time with my good friend Myron, where we've gathered chaparral and put it in my car. And then the car gets so stinky of chaparral that people all the windows usually they're rolled anyway. But then for months afterwards, they can't be around chaparral at all because I've invaded their senses with this pervasive smell of chaparral. At one point, when I was studying with Michael Moore in Albuquerque, I got some chaparral and I was living in a basement apartment. And in order to separate the leaves from the stems, I would put a tarp down, put the plants on the tarp on the floor, and put another tarp on top of it. And then I'd walk on it, right? And just step on it and separate them. And then the people who lived upstairs, my landlords are like, you just can't do that anymore because the smell of chaparral was just going through. And then one more chaparral story is I brought a bunch home where I used to live in Ithaca, which was in a pretty very open house. It's very drafty. And what really surprised me one day is I went to go get my chaparral in a tub and it was moldy. I didn't even know mold can grow on chaparral. So I had to throw out this 30-gallon, probably more like an 18-gallon tub of chaparral that was all moldy. Wow. I have lots of chaparral stories.
Do you like the smell of chaparral?
I do. I don't think I'd want to be trapped in it with no other smells. But I didn't have that reaction after the car ride.
Yeah, I find the smell very intriguing myself, but I wasn't in the car either, so I don't know. And like you said, after the rain, it's so lovely. I think that's part of what intrigues me about chaparral so much is just really the smell grabs your attention in a unique way.
And it's got those fluffy seed pods and those bright yellow flowers and those very dark, shiny leaves in the desert. It's a lovely plant. And native.
When you were talking, Seven Song was just kind of an aside, but I was just thinking about all the botany I've learned from you over the years. Like whenever I see an oak tree in the spring with the leaves on it, I'm like, marcescent. Learned it from Seven Song. Like I just have these little things that are just random.
That's a great word.
Yeah. It is a great word. Yeah. And I think your love of that word has, gleaned on to me. So forever think of you with marcescent. I would love to hear about prickly ash too, because this is a plant that really, it's not a plant
Right.
I've met in person yet, but it's one that I am so fascinated by, and I know that you love it too.
So about every like 10 years, I go down to Florida, um, which is kind of the homeland for Jews, but I don't live down there, and gather plants. And one of the plants I always gather is prickly ash. So I am a Jew, in case that felt weird saying that, but I'm probably just going to put on the things. I'm just going to dig in some awkwardness into this. Um,
Yeah,
I'm going to
I'm
keep going with
following
this
you.
though. I think I'm the only Jew that I know that has no family that lives in Florida. So there's that as well, especially living in New York State. So anyway, I'd go to Florida and gather plants. And prickly ash is a native plant, but there are places where it's kind of weedy. And people often don't want it in the yards because it is very prickly. So just I think last February, the February before, I gathered 3 plants that I went down to Florida to gather. And one of them was prickly ash. And I just got myself maybe 4 gallons of tincture. That should last me hopefully another 10 years. I'm hoping, I'm not really sure. But prickly ash to me is a very valuable plant. And it does 2 things that I really think. So when I say prickly ash, I really mean Xanthoxylum claviherculus, because there are a number of Xanthoxylum species. Xantho means yellow, xylem means wood. Xanthoxylum just means yellow wood. It is a little bit yellow, not like a buckthorn, but yellow. And so, so I gathered it in order to peel the bark off. I got really fortunate. About 5 people, including my good friend Susan Marinowski, who I was staying with, people came over to help me, because it takes many, many, many hours to peel a lot of bark. It's a lot of work and very tedious. So, but I had like 5 people come for like 5 hours, and I got like a pile of prickly ash, inner and outer bark. I don't peel the outer bark off of prickly ash like I do with other plants like wild cherry. And then I tinctured it and made glyceride from it. And so coming back to the uses, one use is it increases bioavailability of other herbs when used internally. This is always a bit of a struggle, right? You take a tincture of a plant, and the question is, how many of the constituents of those plants are going to cross through the lumen and the cells of your digestive tract, make it into your bloodstream, and then get to their tissues? So the answer is we don't really know. Nobody's really radio dating them. I'm not really sure the right word. But it looks like some herbs work more effectively. Like if I give somebody like hawthorn and hibiscus to help strengthen the myocardiocytes, the heart muscles, I like to give with prickly ash, hoping that the prickly ash, because there's plenty of blood supply on the outside of the heart, will allow the constituents to move into the heart cells. Again, this is speculation, but this is how I use it. But it does tend to increase the bioavailability, just really the word availability of plants once you put them in your mouth, for them to get absorbed and move to the tissues that you're hoping that they get to. So again, like what tissue, for bioavailability, it can be with any plant, whether I'm using it for trying to get into liver tissue or the heart, I might use prickly ash. The other thing is, it's probably one of the best herbs for nerve restoration. And here it could be used for internal or external use. So externally, you can make a liniment or apply it as a tincture. A liniment is just a plant in isopropyl alcohol rather than ethanol. Ethanol is drinking alcohol. Isopropyl alcohol is a petroleum-based alcohol that's less expensive, so I use it externally. Since all the medicines I use are free, I give away for free. So if somebody has nerve damage, has neuropathies, has numbness in a part of their body, of course, those are serious red flags. So stay with this for a moment here. So if somebody has numbness in a part of their body, that has to be medically checked out. That could be a diabetic neuropathy. It could be damage to nerves. I mean, that's an important indication that something could be some part of the brain. It's not sending the proper signals to that part of the body. You rule that out and you have like a neuropathy, but it's understood. Neuropathy just means damage to your nerve cells. As opposed to like pain from the outside, the nerve itself has been damaged. And so when the nerve gets damaged, further away from the nerve, what's called distal to where the damage happens, often you get numbness. And one way to help reduce that numbness is by taking prickly ash internally and applying it externally. So here's a common thing. So recently I was working with somebody who was a carpenter, and so did a lot of hammering and other things, screwing with their wrists. They just had a lot of numbness in their hands. And so prickly ash didn't stop it, but it probably reduced it by about 20% taking it. They also eventually started taking some medications that also helped. And then other people who might have a diabetic neuropathy as part of it, but you have to make sure that the neuropathy is not advancing. So to try to make that more simple, it can help nerve repair. So if you've been in an accident and a part of your body is numb or pins and needles, then you have some nerve damage. Get that checked out. If it seems like something that you can use herbs for to recover, I suggest using prickly ash. It's probably one of the best. The other herb that sometimes helps with nerve repair pretty well is St. John's wort. And those two are a great combination. Xanthoxylum claviherculus and Hypericum perforatum, or St. John's wort.
Have you ever used prickly ash for like post shingles when there's still discomfort after the main outbreak has happened?
I have, and it's been pretty mixed. I guess I'm still learning about that. I have a couple of patients with post shingles neuralgia. And I think I'd have to look at my notes, honestly, Rosalee. I forget how helpful. Somebody had so sometimes it affects, there's pain around the eyes, in the eye. And this person was doing prickly ash and they were taking it internally, and actually it reduced some of the severity of pain in their eye. But it was other herbs involved as well.
Another question I had for you is, because you were talking about using it as kind of a catalyst or helping with the bioavailability of formulas. Do you put it in a lot of your formulas? Like, is it something that you often think of?
No, not that much. Occasionally. I mean, cayenne pepper isn't. If people like spicy, cayenne also increases bioavailability. So then you get better patient compliance if they like a little bit of spice in their medicine. And so, I tincture up some cayenne peppers, usually cayenne. You can use other chilies, but I tend to use cayennes.
Yeah.
I would say a small percentage of the medicines have prickly ash in them.
Okay. Well, moving along, you've shared an awesome handout with us, Smoke Inhalation and Herbal Medicine. Would you share a few words about this? And for listeners, you can download your copy at herbswithrosalieepodcast.com. But I believe that this was kind of the interest in sharing this is we've recently had the LA fires and increasingly we're just having more incidences of widespread wildfire smoke.
This fire is right now in North Carolina and South Carolina.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It was yesterday. Yeah, I know. There's so much to say about humans, but I treat them. I treat any human. So, I have lots of my friends are in California and Washington and Oregon, all places that have had lots of wildfires in the past couple of years, especially the southern areas. And the real goal is prevention, because basically particulate matter is going to create whole body disturbance if it gets in your lungs. So really masking is by masking, I mean an N95 where you pinch it around your nose and you just make sure that particulate matter is not getting in there, because once it's in there, it's hard to get out. Mm-hmm. So there's no herbs for that. And so then the goal with this is I want to give a shout out. So I've been working with some of my former students who have been really helpful in organizing and giving out herbs, especially somebody named Christian Toscano. So if you see Christian doing any of this work, I want to say that she's one of the people I know that's been really organizing and getting lots of herbs out. I forget where she lives in Los Angeles. I think she lives actually in Los Angeles. Anyway, and the other reason I'm saying that, it was really helpful for me to have somebody that I trusted to be able to send herbs to. So the whole previous conversation, knowing there's somebody who's going to organize and make sure the herbs get to people and also has clinical skills. Back to the question. So what you're really trying to do after people are breathing in, because you're going to breathe some in. It gets into houses. You can't always wear a mask. It's very uncomfortable. There's a few things. You want to reduce inflammation in the lungs, and you want to try to get particulate matter out of the upper reaches of your lungs. And you usually want to use anti-inflammatories, because what happens is those tiny little particulate pieces go from the alveoli in the lungs into the bloodstream, where they can cause inflammation anywhere, often worsening autoimmune conditions. So you have like just the lung problems. You're coughing a lot, your lungs are irritated, it hurts to breathe. And then you have more widespread inflammation, where you're starting to have flare-ups of autoimmune conditions and other inflammatory states. So some of the things are just cough remedies. Really nice cough remedies when you're working with this are things that are in a honey base, just because honey is very soothing in itself. So, things like wild cherry honey, Prunus serotina, thyme honey, Thymus vulgaris. There are other herbs you can use, but you could also just take honey, right? If you just take some spoonful of honey, stir it in some water and drink it, or just take if you don't have blood sugar issues, it can feel really good. The emulsant herbs tend to help increase the mucosal content in the lungs, and that will help bring things out as well. So getting, even though you're putting them in your stomach, there tends to be, nobody's quite sure how, but embryologically, all your mucous membranes are connected. So as you put things in your stomach, and the mucous membranes in your respiratory tract and your urethra, for different issues, can be affected. And so even if you have a lot of phlegm, meaning a lot of mucus, when you're in these high pollutant environments, increasing your mucal content is usually good, especially if you can make yourself have productive coughs. Productive just means you're producing mucus, and you want to be spitting that mucus out as much as possible. And then there's just a bunch of plants that can help. You have things like balsam root, Balsam oryza sagittata. Doesn't that grow around you, Rosalee?
Yeah, everywhere around me. Yeah.
So that's a really useful root for that. Around here, we use elder campaign a lot. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's Inula species, Inula lineum, not species. Pleurisy root. I'm not sure how much specifics you want me to get into.
Yes, lovely.
But I would say, there's a lot of interesting ideas in the handout. There's a lot you can do, but really all of it is tertiary, quaternary, fiviary, after prevention. The real goal is trying not to get that stuff. And as most of my LA herbalist friends have been saying, their big concern is just watching people, even while it's still burning, walking around unmasked. But it's obvious. It doesn't feel good to wear a mask. It's just, that stuff is just harmful. And, it takes weeks or months for your body to process it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where I live, unfortunately, we will have times where we have weeks and weeks of unhealthy smoke, air quality outside. And we've just had to learn a whole other way of being in terms of indoor food or air purifiers and keeping an eye on all of that. And yeah, it's definitely not a new fun reality, but I appreciate the focus on, we want to prevent, that's the focus rather than like what to do on the back end. We want to prevent first and foremost. That's
yeah. I mean, cough, and then there's a bunch of decongestants to just help get stuff, help get the snot out of your nose so you can breathe better. There are herbs that can help open the lungs up. You have to be a little cautious with those. Like things like lobelia will unconstrict the lungs, but the problem is then you can breathe stuff deeper in. So you just have to be cautious with that. There's really a lot of herbs that could be helpful for it. Yeah, I'm sorry. The fire stuff is getting worse and worse.
And I appreciate just bringing up the systemic inflammation that can happen from it, because chronic inflammation is one of my passions in terms of what we can do to mitigate it. And something I found interesting that I didn't realize before we started having all these lengthy wildfire smoke situations is that cardiovascular events rise dramatically. And, again, that inflammation connection there. So yeah, appreciate the handout. Thank you for sharing it.
It's that classic thing where people have if their gums are inflamed a lot, they often have more chance of heart disease. It has to do with inflammatory chemicals in the body.
Mhm.
Some of those you can check, like CRPs, but it's still, and there's a lot of, I would say for most people, after you've been in an event that's been very hard on your body, if you have insurance that covers it, or if you can pay for it, there's a number of inflammatory markers, and they're helpful to know. They're easy blood tests, but each inflammatory marker, you have to pay for that specific test, unfortunately.
Yeah. Which ones would you recommend, Seven Song?
I shouldn't have said this because I'm trying to. So I like the C-reactive protein, or CRP.
The highly
And then,
sensitive as well, or just the straight up CRP?
what was your question?
The highly there's CRP, and then there's CRP-HS, the highly sensitive CRP.
Actually, that's more information than I knew. I don't know about the highly sensitive. Probably that's a better choice. Actually, I don't know. I'd have to find out, because sometimes, because there's always
they
a
look
little
at
bit
two
of
different things.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
No, I just go for straight out C-reactive protein, and then there's a lot of inflammatory markers for specific problems like arthritis and lupus, and so then those are just individual markers for individual health conditions.
Okay. So it seems like CRP is kind of the big, like the more general thing that you're thinking of.
It is a lot of medical people feel like it's not that helpful because it's elevated for lots of reasons. And so I think if you're listening to this, I think I could probably update my information about inflammatory markers, and probably you could find better stuff online, especially, like, I'm not really sure, for instance, I know CRP is checked out, but there's probably, if you're around wildfires, there's probably other ones that are maybe more specific and more important. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot there.
Thank you.
Well, I know you're working on something for your website, and I'd love to hear more about it. And that's your online herbal database.
Yes. Today I finished the wildcrafting section. So it's been something, I'm pretty excited about it. Still no exclamation marks. I started this during COVID, like early on. And so I've been working on it for a few years. The easy, what did I say? So many things. So in the clinic, so I work at a place called the Ithaca Free Clinic. So I just want to point out, if you're listening to this, I see anybody at the Ithaca Free Clinic. All consultations are free. We do telehealth, meaning you could do it we do what's called Doxy. It's an app. Doxy is an app that is a HIPAA compliant telehealth app. Where was I? The database.
The database.
Got it.
Yeah.
So what happens? I see people. As I said, I see people for 4 hours once a week generally, and during that time, it's usually between 3 to 6 people. And I find that I get into ruts, right? So then everybody who has hypertension, I start saying the same herbs. Everybody has Hashimoto, same herbs. And so I wanted to break myself out of my ruts, especially because I have about 200 herbs available in the clinic and at my home that I can bring to the clinic, probably more. And so I had a very simple idea of just having a database where I can type in hypertension and have some herbs pop up. I'm like, oh, right, I forgot about that one, and I forgot about that one. So I can include them. So, right, olive leaf, right? And so it started this way. And then a friend of mine, Steve Mandel, I started writing about it online. He's a tech guy. And he said, I'll help you make this database. And so now it's this big, well, for me, a very elaborate database that has multiple sections to it. It still does what I wanted it to do. If somebody has a headache, I can type in headache and it will show me, 15 or 20 herbs. But then it will also show me how to use some of those herbs, different synonyms for the herbs, links to other places in my information about the herbs, and handouts. It's getting pretty thorough. So probably in about 2 weeks, we're going to make it live, Steve and I. It's really, if Steve never called me, it would be this very simple thing. Actually, happy birthday, Steve, if you happen to see this today. It's his birthday. And I've always wanted to share. So it's very common that people will ask me if I should write a book. And really, I don't have that much interest. And this might sound a little insulting, but I feel like there's lots of books about herbal medicine. And I changed my mind with some frequency. And so I was always nervous about writing, oh, the Ella campaign does this. And then 1 year later, thinking, really, it doesn't do that, but maybe it does this. So having it on the database allows me to make changes. It's also, as I moved to having more time in my life, because I'm slowing down running my school. For instance, I'm not running my school this year. I've been running an herb school since 1992, and I'm taking this year off, and I'll probably be doing that occasionally. I also need a project. So we'll be putting this herbal database, which has lots of different kinds of information, but it is extremely unfinished. So if you use it, you can do what I said. You can look it up and you can say dysmenorrhea, and lots of things will come up, and then you can link to something else. Steve made it really very usable. Like, you link from dysmenorrhea to an herb, and then you go from that herb to a different category, from that category to a different health issue, and then you can easily find your way back to what you initially were looking for. But it really will never be finished. But I think it's good enough for the amount of information, and then I just will spend the rest of my life basically working on it. It'll be on my website, which is sevensong.com. And if you scroll down just a little bit, it'll say herbal database, and then a bunch of drop-down menus. Don't go there yet. Everything is coming soon. I'm hoping Steve and I get it up in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think by the time this airs, it'll probably be up. Yeah, so we'll cross our fingers on that. And I think this sounds very exciting. I'm not afraid of exclamation points. I'll put a couple on there.
Thanks. Yeah, Rosalee, we're talking about, and said this is just a weird thing. I haven't used an exclamation point or mark in about 3 years, and I've reached that point. Do you ever do this? I'm sure some of you do this, where you don't do something for a while, and then you just don't do it because you haven't done it, and you kind of don't want to break your record for not doing it. I am currently that way with two things: exclamation marks and with any kind of emoji. I've never used an emoji. So wow. I probably could use one, but I don't want to break my record about not using one, which is called silly. Because I find this all the time medically, because people will say, well, I've never taken antibiotics, and they have a massive infection. I'm like, well, it is time for antibiotics. But it is not time for me yet to use emojis. Maybe.
Okay. I feel like I'm going to have to follow up on this, because I'm going to want to know what your first emoji is. This is going to be,
yeah.
Is it going to be something classic like the herb emoji, which, or is it going to be,
not going to be
like a Tori Amos related one? Like I use the piano.
I guess I'll have to make my own. Maybe I'd make one with I would make one maybe with an emoji. Exclamation mark, and then the line going through it saying no exclamation marks. I don't know.
All right. All right. Well, I look forward to that, Seven Song.
Thanks, Rosalee. Yes.
Before you go, I know this could be a big question, but I'm kind of interested in the small question of it. And that is, what would be some helpful first aid herbs for people to have around the home?
There's a couple of easy ones. One of the first ones I would recommend would just be propolis or pine resin tincture.
Oh, interesting.
I just usually use propolis. I just buy it, but you can use pine resin the same way. And if you tincture it, it's just a great wound covering. So if you get like a cut on you and it's not severe, and you just want to put a liquid bandage on top of it, propolis works well. It also makes a barrier. So it's harder for bacteria to get in, and it's disinfectant in itself. So I think propolis is one of the best ones. I'm really a big fan of most of the plants in the genus Berberis, formerly in the genus Mahonia. So all of your Oregon grapefruits, and around us are Japanese barberries. They are just really good internal and external antibacterial and antiviral medicines. So they're just really good to have on hand in case you get a food poisoning or a respiratory virus. I think those two alone really cover a lot of bases. Importantly, do not use Berberis, any species, if you're pregnant. That causes some uterine contractions. So that's important. The other thing that propolis does well is if you get a sore throat, an infected throat, you can put it in with other herbs, and it'll help the herbs stick to your throat for a couple of seconds longer. Allowing you to kill any bacteria in your throat. I am a big fan of echinacea, taking echinacea at the first sign of getting sick. and taking pretty large amounts depending on your sensitivity, really just depending on your sensitivity and how old you are. I mean, very small to anything that's a teenager or above. And taking, 1 to 2 dropperfuls, 2 to 4 milliliters at the earliest side to try to get your innate and adaptive immunity kicked in a little bit stronger. They're really helpful. These days, I'm really a big fan of elecampane. I'd probably use balsam root where you are. There's just so many respiratory infections that have inflammation, brought on by wildfires, brought on by COVID, brought on by pretty much all the respiratory viruses. So it's nice that whatever, having a combination of those. And then it's just good to have a couple of nervines around the home, whatever helps relax you. So if you have, some Damiana, rose, tulsi, betony, plants in the genus Botanica. I think those are really nice as teas and tinctures, passion flower, blue vervain. Yeah, it's pretty much as always tumultuous times. Maybe there are more tumultuous. Right now, certain things are definitely more harder for people. And so those, I guess, are, I can name hundreds, but those are some. Let me just name one more that's, it's just a little bit otter. I've actually never seen I've only ever seen a wild otter once. One of my goals is to see otters. Didn't you say you see otters where you live, Rosalee?
Yeah, we do have otters here. Yeah.
You're so lucky. Is lobelia tincture if people have asthma. It's just a very specific, but there's only one other herb that helps open lungs better than lobelia, but it has side effects. So just because people have asthma very regularly, all over the place, I like to always have a bottle of lobelia tincture. Despite its warnings, it's fairly safe to use. I just learned more about it, but it's just helpful. But I have, hundreds of plants here, but a few of them really work. You want to get something for inflammation, something for breathing, something for infection, something for internal infections. And then one more, never just really one more. But a useful hint is having some tobacco around for bee stings. So if you get stung by a bee, it won't. If you're going anaphylactic, EpiPen. I would say every house needs an EpiPen, but they're very expensive and they go out of date. But anyway, if you get stung by a bee and you're not allergic, if you just take some tobacco, you can even chew up some Marlboro if those still exist, and just put it on, and it reduces the pain. It's just pain reduction for the chemicals that are injected in you by bees and ants.
Wow, I didn't see a lot of those coming at all, Seven Songs. So those are some unique offerings. I will say there's one thing that I keep on hand because of you, and that's charcoal. Activated charcoal.
I need to say charcoal. Yeah.
So that's something that after I watched your first aid program, that's definitely something that I was like, okay, I'll just keep that on hand. And I've used it, for, especially I take it when I go down travel to Mexico and stuff. And so that's a good one.
That's another really excellent one. So you can learn more about it. Basically, activated charcoal could be used internally and externally. Stuff clings to it is the basic idea of it. And then if you take it internally and it comes out your buttocks. So if you have a bacterial infection, it won't touch a virus. So if you have a gastrointestinal virus, it won't do it because it's too deep in the cells. But if you have a bacterial infection or a protozoal infection like Giardia, activated charcoal is one of the things to take internally. You can study it. There's lots of information about it.
Wonderful. Well, this has been absolutely fabulous. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and for sharing so much with us, and really looking forward to seeing your herbal database come online. That's going to be awesome.
Thanks, Rosalee. Thanks. Double Virgo.
Thanks for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com to download your handout on smoke inhalation and herbal medicine from Seven Song. There, you'll also be able to sign up for my newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. You can also find more about Seven Song on his website, sevensong.com. That's the number 7song.com. If you'd like more herbal episodes to head your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community. Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Emily Thomas Anderson is the project manager who oversees the entire podcast operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes and on and on. I often tell people, I just show up. Emily does most of the heavy lifting. Nicole Paul is the operator for the entire Herbs with Rosalee school and community. She keeps an eagle eye view on everything to ensure it's running smoothly. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusakova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them, and I know you love them. Once the illustration is ready, Jenny creates the recipe cards as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Alex is our behind-the-scenes tech support and social media manager, and Karen and Emily are our student services coordinators and community support. If you've written in with a question, undoubtedly you got help from them. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Thank you so much for your support through your comments, reviews, and ratings. One of my favorite things about this podcast is hearing from you. I read every comment that comes in, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Okay, you've lasted to the very end of the show, which means you get a gold star and this random herbal tidbit. So after I turned off the recording with Seven Song, he said he forgot to share something he learned from Michael Moore, which was to reference pop culture as a way to connect with folks, which is essentially what Seven Song was doing with his references to Tori Amos, who I'm a big fan of. You probably know that by now, as well as astrology. So I can assure you that Seven Song isn't interested in either. But since he did mention Tori on several occasions, I will definitely be inviting him back to the podcast. We didn't get around to chatting about this, but Seven Song loves herpetology, including frogs, of course. And I recently got a tattoo of a frog, which was inspired by Tori's song titled Frog on My Toe. Yes, it's a tattoo of a frog on my toe. So that's a random tidbit and then a random crossover of interests between Seven Song and I. As always, thank you for joining me on this herbal adventure. I'll see you next time. Hi, it's Rosalee. If this podcast has brought you inspiration or grounded you in your love of herbs, I'd love to invite you to join the podcast circle. Your membership helps support the show, and it gives you access to live herbal classes, exclusive resources, and a warm community of fellow plant lovers. Learn more and join us at herbalpodcastcircle.com. Your support truly helps this podcast thrive. Thank you.